We'll get to our tokenomics segment right now. I'm learning about this as I'm teaching it, which is kind of unique because usually teachers are looked at as experts. They shouldn't be. Teachers are also students, and I'm a student of tokenomics. And when I first came into crypto, I heard that Bitcoin had a maximum supply, and I was like, that means that it's going to be hard to get. Digital scarcity. And then as I learned more about crypto, especially started looking at DeFi tokens that were kind of copying this model of having a max supply, I would look at tokenomics. This is like in 2020, 2021, when I was getting my feet wet with crypto and DeFi specifically. I didn't understand how a founder could predict the perfect inflation or emission schedule and how long it needed to be before putting that max supply in place. Before the protocol even launches, here's our schedule of emissions and inflation, and here's our max supply. This is the number. I never understood that. And once I understood how Bitcoin worked, where the inflation rewarded the miners for having this computing power at their disposal to unlock new Bitcoins. I know that's not how you should think of it, as unlocking Bitcoin, but for a new person, I think it's helpful to think of it as these miners are unlocking Bitcoin that's due to be released and they get rewarded for it. I always thought, like, what happens at the end of the Bitcoin schedule? Like, why are the miners gonna keep doing this when this mining equipment and the electricity costs are so high? I never really thought about it deeply until we saw Prop 16 on Juno, where everyone got a lesson in immutability. Validators can choose to just change anything they want about the protocol, including who has tokens and who doesn't. So if you're on a proof of stake network, it is not immutable. If the validators want, they can vote to take tokens out of one wallet and put them in another wallet without you actually doing a transaction. Why can't that happen? Like, if all these miners come together, all these developers come together and they change the Bitcoin protocol, they can also change the maximum supply. I never really thought much beyond that other than Bitcoin maybe shouldn't have a max supply. Then I talked to Eric. Eric says Bitcoin will not have a max supply. He says no. At the end of this inflation schedule, they're going to have to get together. I guess he means the miners, change the protocol and just have some flat inflation so that the miners are incentivized to continue mining Bitcoin. I'm like, okay, that's better, because you don't know if once any protocol's inflation schedule runs out and they hit that max supply, how do they know that the network's going to be sustainable, generating revenue, rewarding the miners, the validators, depending if it's proof of work or proof of stake? What does this have to do with Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is a good example because most people in crypto understand it as the scarce asset. But my thinking is it doesn't have to have a max supply to necessarily be scarce. There just has to be times where more people want it than there are people willing to sell it. You know, in proof of stake, this is how the initial Genesis launches are set up, right? Where there's very few tokens in circulation. We talked about that last time. On Monday, we talked about these low float, high FDV launches, where you have like this magical supply squeeze that makes the token seem more desirable than it really is until people start selling. But I interviewed Eric about Astrovault specifically, and Astrovault is a DEX that has a token that manages. The token is used as a governance token to manage the revenue of the DEX, and the DEX does have a revenue stream. And one of the most fun conversations to have is over inflation. And in the interview, I'll link it down below. It was good because he explained that without inflation in real life, you don't get things like fire departments, schools, hospitals, roads, and things like that. Inflation pays for things that people don't want to pay for. And then people complain about inflation because, yes, they do experience some dilution of their currency if you have a savings. That buying power does take a hit with inflation. But You get roads and schools and fire departments and all that. Where I live, we have all volunteer fire departments. So the firemen do not have salaries. And that's true for my county and the county next to mine. It's several million people. And we have hundreds of fire departments with thousands, tens of thousands of firefighters that are volunteer. But the fire engines, the equipment, the training, the fire stations themselves, those have to get paid for somehow. He's responding to like a clip where we discuss inflation being actually an expense for a proof of stake network. It's an expense because it's you're paying for something, development, rewards, whatever, in that native token. And this was my tweet trying to promote the video here. And someone here says inflation needs to die for these chains to live. And then he says chains will not live without inflation. But here's Dark Side of the podcast. I wanted to have him on today. Guy went to a Renaissance fair. Last week we had somebody say, oh, I can't watch your stream because I'm going to go watch Scarface, which I said was the worst movie ever. Now he's going to a Renaissance fair. It might be even more boring than watching Scarface. And he says, this is a good take. I think he's specifically talking about Cosmos, where we have lots of proof of stake networks that are unsustainable because Cosmos scaled horizontally and didn't build protocols on top to attract users and revenue and all that. He says, how could they? Referring to chains not being able to live without inflation. Very few of them earn any revenue, and cash flow positive is never in the discussion. With inflation, they die. Without inflation, they die. They start from a flawed premise. I am indifferent to it, but they take everyone out with them. The whole space needs an enema. He's talking about purging these chains that are not sustainable. I thought we would have seen the enema during the bear market, but no. We should not have had this many during the bear market. Lots of them should have shut down. If they don't have protocols that are generating revenue, they should have collapsed down as applications and been placed on some of the other networks that are smart contract platforms. That's my opinion. People are very tricked by inflation in Web3. They're fooled because they see it as rewards. It's an expense because you're paying those rewards in the layer 1 token that must be sold. The tokens that are emitted from inflation, they're never bought, they're just sold. If you know how an AMM works, it's a DEX. Basically getting the result of supply and demand, where if there's more buying than selling, the price goes up. If there's more selling than buying, the price goes down. Why am I interested in this? I'm interested in this because I want to know what's the best tokenomics. Some good protocols could have bad tokenomics, and no matter how well the protocol does, the token itself could just gradually go to zero because a lot of the tokens are really not connected to the platform in any way other than name. If the token is not actually reflecting the value and demand of the protocol, the tokenomics are not good. Tank is commenting here. He's saying, bring inflation to 2%, cut the validator line to 100, could be less, implement a burn function to CPs. I'm assuming he means community pools based on chain usage. I wonder what chain, Tank, are you talking about specifically? Or are you talking about as the somewhat mature Cosmos chains that have already gone through their liquidity bootstrapping where the inflation is really high for a year or two? You're saying cut that down to 2%. And Poroboro says something that's more nuanced, right? Inflation is socially acceptable rate of dumping on liquidity. Right. And for every chain, they're going to have a different socially acceptable rate. And Cosmos has 80 chains. So every chain has to go its own way. What we should have in Cosmos is 80 different versions of tokenomics. And then the best one should win over time. But we also have protocols and apps that have their own tokens, and those should be constantly searching for the perfect model as well. He says it's close to an expense, but relative. Right. So when I was talking with Eric in the interview, Astrovault as a company, as a business, they count the expense as it's emitted from the protocol. However, not all those tokens get sold right away. So they have a very conservative way of figuring out the expense. They count it as an expense as it's emitted at that price, I guess. Tank is saying that his comment could apply to a lot of chains. Yeah. I want to see different models. I don't want to see one chain copying off 5 other chains that where it looks like the token already failed. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. And my general feeling is, inflation aside, these tokens are asked to do too many different things, and I don't think it's realistic. I don't think you could have a token serve as a token for salaries for your devs, payment to your validators and infrastructure, rewards for your stakers for security, also rewards for LPers, also the community pool, and also strategic fund. And then you put it all into a vesting schedule, which is not great, because those vested tokens are usually able to be used to accrue rewards anyway. If you allow vesting tokens to accrue rewards and governance power and LP incentives, even though they can't be sold, it defeats the purpose of the vesting schedule. AXV is the Astrovault token. They have no max supply. They have inflation, but as those tokens trickle through the protocol, there's a burn in place to offset some of the inflation. There will probably be times where the token's deflationary, even though it has no max supply and inflation, which I think they're onto something. I bought this token early on. I continued to buy it. With a little bit of a tailwind, this is going to be one of my top 3 positions in my portfolio easily. Now, I don't love that they don't have full control over their protocol because they're on the Archway network, which is a blockchain. So Astrovault is an application on Archway. It's almost like how Uniswap is an application on Ethereum. So with an application, you save on security because the layer 1 secures you by default. But you don't have full control over your protocol. That's why DYDX launched its own chain. They want full granular control over the base layer. I get that. But that's DYDX. There aren't that many DYDXs out there. Here's my tweet about max supply. And this is from a while ago. And we're still talking about inflation here because it is related to the max supply, right? Max supply means your inflation ends at a certain point. You don't have perpetual inflation. Inflation in general is used to pay for upfront costs for security, incentives, salaries, and all of that. Regarding tokens with a max supply, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't mean the token's going to do well. I think that when all these founding teams decided that their tokens would have a max supply, they're trying to copy Bitcoin and steal some of that digital scarcity thunder. No. People need a reason to buy your token, otherwise it will never be scarce, even if you have 1 token in your max supply. If no one wants it, the value is 0. Who cares if it's deflationary or not, or if there's a max supply or not? Who cares? A lot of this